Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Fulfillment demand continues to skyrocket and outpace available labor. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible fulfillment solutions like 6 River Systems. Utilizing 6 River Systems' award-winning combination of collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, and operational expertise will make your associates and wall-to-wall fulfillment workflow more efficient. No new infrastructure, no change to warehouse layout, easy to deploy and scale, easy to train and retain associates, all at half the cost of traditional automation. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Go to www.6river.com to learn more. That's www.6river.com to learn more.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Jim Yarbrough. He is the Global Intelligence Program Manager at BSI, and you may remember BSI from some of our previous podcast episodes where we've talked about porch pirates and we've talked about other security issues within the supply chain. So Jim is going to talk to us a little bit about security risks revolving around cargo theft and what did we see in 2020, and also talk a little bit about how organizations can start to prepare to deal with these newer risks, and also what risks might be on the horizon in 2021, and how you can get your organization and supply chain ready for this year from a security standpoint. So, Jim, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Happy to talk to you. You know, you guys always have very interesting insights at BSI when it comes to security in the supply chain, and we're very interested in that, obviously, because we don't want to lose any freight or anything of that nature. So for those that may not be familiar with BSI or who have not heard the previous episodes featuring some of your colleagues, why don't you give us a little brief overview of what BSI is exactly?
Well, BSI is British Standards Institution, and we have quite a few different types of services and ways we work with organizations. BSI is much more well-known across the world as a standards organization. I work in the intelligence program, as you mentioned before, and we have a offering for supply chain professionals around the world to look at where security issues may be emanating from, threat intelligence related to cargo theft and smuggling issues, looking at where international supply chains may have different types of risks, and those risks, of course, evolve through time as well. So looking at human rights issues in the supply chain or environmental issues, any types of business continuity disruptions, be it the criminal activity that we just spoke of or terrorism activity. But it could also include, of course, natural disasters or political upheavals or even like labor strikes and those types of things. So a lot of multinational organizations rely on our services to help them stay in front of where those threats are and what those threats may mean for their businesses and what they can do about that as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, very interesting. And, obviously you guys are really focused in on that security aspect, and you have very good point there that, it's not just about theft and security. Probably the first thing that comes to mind for people is theft and also, but you're looking at risks as well throughout the globe. Like you mentioned, political upheaval and all these different natural disasters that can occur. And obviously, 2020 was certainly, we probably like checked all the boxes, I'm sure, in terms of like what risks are out there for the supply chain. I don't think we missed any of them. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about, what type of security risks did we see increase specifically for cargo theft in 2020?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's all of the above, right? It's the pandemic has obviously had a massive effect on all of our operations and the way we do business. A lot of the things that we examine are looking at how criminal activity may change throughout time and according to whatever type of condition we're talking about. And with the pandemic, one thing that really sticks out to us as analysts of looking at where criminal activity is happening in the supply chain, typically what you see globally, and there are a few exceptions to this rule, but typically what you see is the vast majority of theft or the introduction of illicit material into legitimate supply chains happens within transit cargo. Once it leaves your facility and it's in the truck or the ship or the airplane, that's where the more vulnerable aspects of the supply chain may be. And of course, that's where criminals typically flood to. But during the pandemic, we started seeing this in pockets in Europe, mostly Northern Europe and Western Europe, but then we started seeing it in South Africa, and we started seeing this in Latin America and in the United States. Was a real shift towards theft from warehouse facilities. And again, it's when you have the hardened security apparatus in place at warehouses, it's typical for criminals to wait until the goods are leaving the facilities to target that. But in a lot of cases, we saw warehouse thefts really jump up to being, the number 2, number 3 typical location of where cargo crime was happening in 2020.
Wow. And so when you say warehouse theft, you're talking about they're actually going into the warehouse and taking things, or they're taking things like out of the yard? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, both. But actually, most of the time, what we're talking about is in the warehouse itself. There's a couple of pretty obvious factors that I would say. It's in the height of lockdowns. Just the fact that goods were not moving as typical as they normally are. Criminals are still. They're like the rest of us. They still need to make their money, right? So they started doing what they had to do and targeting the actual warehouse facilities. But there's also the secondary effect of the pandemic is that you had massive stockpiles of particular goods that were just staying in warehouses, and that led to a lot of warehouse overflow, right? And people were moving stockpiled materials and products into secondary warehouse locations that may or may not, in a lot of cases, not have the same security infrastructure in place and different access controls in place in the overflow areas, and that's where we started seeing a lot of theft happening in kind of the anything that's off schedule and out of place, that's where you have a lot of factors being, aggregated there that's going to allow, a lot more criminal activity. And so we started seeing the effects of that, after the second half of 2020, continuing through the end of the year as well.
Interesting. So with these warehouse thefts, I mean, are they targeting like warehouses where there's nobody there at the time, like on off hours, or maybe the warehouse is shut down due to COVID reasons? Or, I mean, are we talking like they're coming in like, I don't know, stick up, like, people are there and they're like, all right, give me 5 pallets of this or that or whatever?
Yeah, at that level of detail, I'm not sure I could say what the precise trend is, but we did see cases of everything you just explained. Yeah, I mean, there's, and I will say, insider threat is a big trend in warehouse crime. Is unfortunately, people that are inside the organization that we may be talking about. It may not be the production organization. It could be just where things are stored, or the other logistics companies that may be involved in the storage. But typically when you have warehouse thefts, there is some degree of insider threat that's involved in the actual crime. And I can speak from personal experience from many years ago when I was a warehouse manager. That's the only loss that ever happened on my watch was an insider threat that happened there too. So I know how it kind of can go down, but that's typically going to be one of your main contributing factors there, is that someone from within the organization has identified highly valuable commodities that are being stored there, and also knowing what the vulnerabilities in the security apparatus is within that facility. So knowing where the blind spots are for cameras, or knowing how to bypass alarms or security personnel, those types of things are going to be typically what you see. And I'm talking at the macro level, globally, that is a trend that you can usually identify.
Interesting. So I'm curious, actually, very interesting, the insight on the security aspect, and, the different varying things that can happen. And, I've certainly seen some loss as a warehouse manager myself as well, internally, not on a huge scale, just, having small things that are attractive that people actually would buy themselves is definitely tempting for them. So I'm curious, in your warehouse experience as a warehouse manager, how did you end up getting to this point in your career? Was it that event that triggered you to be like, I want to look at security and supply chain, or how did you end up going this path?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, it's well, this is a really personal story, but yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in North Georgia, where there's a lot of textiles produced in the carpet industry, and worked in that, as a young person. But when I was at university, that's when 9/11 happened, and my focus went from I was looking at journalism school and being a writer and those kinds of things, but my focus, after 9/11 turned to national security issues, and I got involved in international relations and global security issues. Yeah. And that led me to work with an organization that worked on export controls and kind of nuclear nonproliferation issues. So that work that I did for years actually led me to BSI, because BSI had acquired an organization that was looking at supply chain security, and my background of doing, at that point in my career, doing assessment work, looking at national export control regimes, and looking at how different countries were approaching the risks of their border controls from a supply chain security perspective, really overlapped with what BSI was looking at doing. And it just so happened at that time there was a contract with the U.S. government that was looking at building an intelligence platform for U.S. government personnel to understand supply chain security as they were moving goods around the world, and also assessing supply chain security at the national level at countries around the world. So my experience in export control work was beneficial to that, but honestly, it was a lot of the work that I had done at the warehouse level and the supply chain level of looking at our suppliers back at the company I worked with years ago, really helped us in that job, that first job I did with BSI of establishing an intelligence platform for U.S. government on supply chain security issues. So, taking some of those same approaches and applying that to how do countries deal with the criminal aspects within the supply chains in their countries. What kind of laws and regulations are in place, what kind of institutions are built up within countries, and what is the relationship between the trade community and the government to transfer knowledge, best practices, but also a good understanding of what the criminal aspects are within their countries. Allowed us to really create national threat intelligence for countries around the world in terms of how much cargo is being stolen. And of course, at this time, we're looking at how are illicit materials being planted into the supply chain that may arrive at the United States ports, right? And so looking at where the vulnerabilities are within the supply chains. And to kind of tie a bow on this story, when we did that work, it became very apparent to commercial organizations starting in the United States, but eventually globally, that same intelligence and information could be very valuable to organizations to understand for their own supply chains. How do they mitigate these threats, and how do they identify those threats? Because, as I said earlier, they do change a lot over time, and now we provide that same kind of intelligence to companies to help them understand, that yesterday's threats may be different than today's threats and tomorrow's threats, but also that as big events happen around the world, they have a cascading effect on how criminal activity and corrupt activity may come to the supply chain as well because of those events.
I want to take a quick break to tell you about Variable and the new solution for on-demand labor. With demand always changing, why is your headcount always staying the same? If you're bottlenecked and overpaying for labor, your business can't keep up, much less scale. You can change that starting right now with Variable's on-demand labor platform. Post your work today and have bids from workers within hours. You'll be breezing through your backlog in no time with the help of the performance-rated workers you select. There's no volume commitments or term agreements, and you pay only for what you use. Post your first opportunity today at variableops.com/thenewwarehouse. That's VERYABLEOPS.com/thenewwarehouse. Now back to the show. Interesting. Yeah. I'm always interested to hear, I guess, people's journeys for when they start out in kind of the operation side and warehousing side, because, talking to so many different people in the space, it leads you in so many different directions. So, and it usually at some point it comes like full circle where you're able to draw on that original experience, much like it sounds like you did when you started out with BSI. So really, really interesting, a little detour there from the topic we're discussing. But
but I will say, it is extremely useful to, when you're talking about kind of those kind of high level things I was just mentioning, looking at international supply chains and looking at national threats, to kind of put yourself back in the shoes of the guy on the warehouse floor, working the dock, how is he going to identify, or she going to identify, this is out of place, this is wrong, this is going to be bad. And, if you can put yourself in that position to be like, okay, we can create policies and talk about things all day long, but at the end of the day, you got to get that related to the people actually out there doing that work. And so it's been really helpful to kind of put yourself back in those shoes of being like, okay, if I'm back in that old warehouse, decades ago, how's this going to relate to me, this intelligence that we're talking about here?
Definitely, yeah. It really gives you a good insight, I'm sure. So I guess kind of continuing on that thought a little bit, talking about, identifying or being able to think about how someone in that warehouse space could identify that something's out of the ordinary, right? So how can organizations, I guess, we talked a little bit about, some of the changes that are happening in 2020. You mentioned the second half of 2020 where warehouse theft kind of took a little uptick. And, how do you guys and how do organizations themselves be able to identify some type of thing, or what can cause shifts in criminal behavior that might make them more susceptible to something that they weren't so susceptible to previously?
Yeah, a lot of it is awareness and building knowledge and awareness and cascading that information to, everyone who has like, an opportunity to identify those things. Right. And so obviously we sell a service that people subscribe to that provides daily updates to this type of information. But something that we see commonly working with, really large organizations that have, domestic and international business partners and suppliers, is seeing that in a lot of cases, people feel really confident and comfortable that they may know that things are happening out in the world, but they don't think it's going to happen to them. In a lot of cases, I look at questionnaires and assessments and things like that we send out to suppliers and business partners around the world, and we're asking questions about what does your security perimeter fencing look like, and do you have the right kind of access controls? And in a lot of cases, you see responses of like, well, we're not in a highly threatening area. There's no crime here, or there's no cargo theft here. And then we can go back and look at our database in a lot of cases and be like, actually, I know you're in a really nice section of Pennsylvania or wherever the place may be, but we have data here that shows that actually there are warehouse thefts in your location, and we got to relay that information back to them and say, like, I know you are doing everything you can, but there is a real threat here, and you need to be aware of it, and you need to address those threats.
Interesting. Yeah. I think one thing that goes along with that too is like complacency as well, or like you just mentioned, even though you think that you're in I guess quote unquote nice area, doesn't mean that you're not at risk, right? So you should still prepare yourself. So it's really good work that you guys are doing to be able to alert people to that and let them know, when things are happening around them, and also different changes within the criminal behavior that's happening out there. Because I guess, like it or not, criminal behavior is probably always going to be there in some form. It's just what form is it in, I guess, currently most prevalent, and what are you at most risk for? So we talked a little bit about, what was on the uptick in 2020. So now we're in 2021. I guess everybody's breathing a big sigh of relief, but I don't think we're necessarily there in the clear of everything from 2020 yet. But, curious, how can organizations prepare themselves this year for either by increasing their security measures or kind of addressing these new threats like warehouse theft that have arisen in the past couple months, and how can they put measures in place and also, I guess, prepare themselves in different ways throughout their supply chain, just to make sure that, not only themselves and their internal components are protected, but also where their product goes throughout the supply chain as well when it comes to their vendors and things of that nature. How can they really prepare themselves and secure themselves this year?
Yeah, well, I think Kevin, you nailed it with the complacency comment. It's working with a lot of business continuity professionals in recent years is really, re-emphasized to myself even, is that you cannot be complacent with your business continuity planning or reviewing your policies and procedures. You need to revisit these things routinely and really, really challenge yourself. Is this, we may have not have suffered an incident in the last year or the last 2 years or whatever. That does not mean that there's nothing to improve upon there. And there's always areas that you can improve your security posture and your awareness and your communication processes, and making sure that everybody involved has an understanding that they have a role to play in security, and really making sure that security culture is getting through to the entire organization. And in addition to that, I would say with the way the pandemic has affected supply chains and the economic conditions have affected the supply chains, a lot of suppliers and business partners may not be in business anymore, or there just may be conditions in which, like, okay, we need to find a cheaper business partner or supplier, or we may need to bring some suppliers closer to home or closer to the the organization's headquarters, or you may be building resiliency within your suppliers and backups. When you're choosing new business partners and new suppliers, getting a good, firm understanding of what new threats or different threats may be associated with the locations that they may be in, or the conditions that they may be in, or even the changing commodity landscape too. Who would have predicted in 2019 that hand sanitizer and medical masks would be among the most commonly targeted theft products in 2020, right? So those things change, and just being aware of your business partner that may have been a partner for decades, and always reliable, always safe, and always secure. Just the conditions around them and the conditions of the world may have you may have a new equation there in terms of what does your risk profile look like. So highly recommend revisiting all of those areas.
Definitely very, very interesting points there. And you have a great point about who would have predicted that masks and hand sanitizer would be not only in huge demand from the consumer, but also, like you said, a highly stolen item as well. So really good tips and insights there on how to prepare yourself and kind of secure your supply chain a little further as well going into this new year. Now I'm curious, I think I asked this of your colleague Tony Pelli on the last episode when I spoke to him as well, but what's the craziest story that you have in terms of theft, or maybe specifically warehouse theft, since we were talking about that, that you can share with us?
You broke up a little bit. Did you say the craziest story?
Yeah, craziest. Yeah.
Oh wow, that is a very good question. Man, I wish I had something hilarious to share with you. I don't know. I'd have to really think about that if I want to come back and do comedy hour with you on this, because there's definitely some funny things that we've seen over the years. I can say from, I've been doing this for 11 plus years now at this point. Some of the most outstanding or remarkable things that I've seen, not that I'm congratulating these folks, but the cybersecurity component making its way into the physical criminal activity in the supply chain has been really just amazing, how it's proliferated around the world. The sophistication around it has really been amazing to see unfold. But basically companies hacking into logistics companies' information and websites, and then appearing physically at docks and ports, pretending to be, the logistics company, and basically making off with really valuable cargo, and seeing that happen in just extremely disparate, very different areas of the world, in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia. We're seeing it all over the world, that type of activity, and the level of sophistication is just remarkable that we're seeing there. And that's something that I would imagine is absolutely going to continue to grow in sophistication. Wow.
That is pretty crazy, I would say, because that's very very thought out and very intricate in the, I guess, planning of doing that. And also, like you mentioned, the technology side as well, going in and being able to, I guess, probably not only identify what cargo is there to target, and then also, being able to probably, I guess, switch up the information so that it looks like you are the person that's gonna pick it up.
That's kind of the dilemma of the security professional, right? Is that you're facing highly organized, highly sophisticated criminals. You're also facing bad luck, and you're just facing opportunists that will just grab anything. Like you said earlier, they see a nice shiny object they'd like to have, and they'll go after it. Somebody will, and so the security professional has to guard against the well-planned, the highly sophisticated, well-funded, organized criminal activity around the world. But they also have to watch out for, the dumb luck or just the opportunists too. And so it's a real challenge. So to mitigate against all those types of threats.
Yeah, definitely, and very good points there as well. So really, really good information from the security side, and also really good insight on the warehouse theft side as well. And thank you for sharing that with me and with our listeners as well. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today. How can people find out more information about BSI?
Yeah, our website, bsigroup.com. That's B as in British, S as in standards institution, so bsigroup.com. And then our intelligence platform is known as Screen, so SCREEN. And you can contact us through that and understand more about subscribing to the intelligence platform. And of course, we also offer environmental health and safety services. There's a lot of discussions, with people getting back into warehouses and, kind of reinvigorating people to look at for health and safety issues in the warehouse too. Those are things we can help you with as well. And of course, the supplier angles that we were talking about before, we also offer supplier vetting and questionnaires and assessments and audits and things like that as well too. So there's a lot we can do to help organizations around the world really, our taglines make excellence a habit, but to really build a resilient organization and to help you with all of these challenges and risks that companies are facing today.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll put all that information on thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can find it easily. So Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Kevin, thanks so much. It's great to talk to you, and looking forward to talking to you again someday.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.